Welcome to the Planet Ripple Logs. I am your host, Nick on Planet Ripple. This log continues our coverage of humans, cyborg humans this time, which by design are almost nothing like today's. Pacemakers still exist, and even things we're currently aiming to create like fully functioning artificial hearts, kidneys, livers, and eyes are commonplace in Minno's world. But it's the bionic prosthetics that really separate modern cyborgs from those of Minno's era. Between pirate attacks, accidents with heavy machinery, large sea creatures, and good old severe infections, there are many ways to lose an arm or a leg on Planet Ripple. And while most of today's bigotries, homophobia, transphobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, may be long gone 30,000 years in the future, one modern form of bigotry has made a big comeback in Minno's century. Ableism. Physically disabled people have it rough, especially amputees. Minnow was born into an age of piracy. Pirates like the Barracuda gang taken the world by storm with vast cyborg soldier armies. Despite pirate combatants being less than 1% of all cyborgs in the world and basically being their own category, and many cyborgs being the victims of pirate attacks with the scars to show it, innocent cyborgs are scapegoated constantly. It's one thing if your upgrades are internal and you can pass as abled. But with such visible augmentations as these, get used to people saying you walk like a pirate. Cyborgs are also deemed physically undesirable by society. With cyborgs now being so common, there's an entire industry built to glamorize and fetishize non-cyborgs for their 100% natural bodies. Even a prosthetic pinky finger gets you disqualified from modeling in most circles. Despite all this, amputees are actually pressured to become cyborgs, and not to lead easier, more fulfilling lives, but to be useful. A busy pair of hands performing essential menial tasks. Yet even the hardest working cyborg, if lucky enough to not be compared to pirates, dehumanized and objectified, can still expect to be called burdensome, expensive, a drain on their community. It seems the whole world is against them. So what innovative new technologies are there to help Minno's generation of cyborgs to rebuild the maimed and impaired and marginalized? These cuffs are integrated couplings, letting people pop entire bionic limbs on and off like an action figure. This may sound vaguely similar to osseointegration, where titanium implants are fused to bone and limbs locked on, but cuffs are a much more barbaric practice that mangles the body. Cuffs are sprawling, invasive chunks of hardware, digging into flesh with nodes and injection tubes. Every time a cuffed person moves, these structures are tugged around, constantly stressing muscles with tiny lacerations that never fully heal, to say nothing of cuff displacement. If a cuff isn't completely secure, if a cyborg lifts something too heavy or pulls too quick, terrible bleeding can occur. To prevent this, some cuffs automatically release limbs when pulled hard. This has its own drawback, as if someone catches themselves falling overboard, their arms will just pop out. And even if someone's careful not to strain themselves, they still have to contend with infectious sores, as their flesh rejects these foreign bodies. Osseointegration patients can experience some irritation in the skin surrounding an implant, but this is easily mitigated with soap and water. Soap is fairly limited in Minno's world, and cleaning out with salt water isn't as helpful as it sounds. To keep the human body from rejecting these upgrades, cyborgs take Vitae supplements, a product sold by Cura Industries. When the flood first happened, vast pockets of a previously undiscovered element were released into the ocean. This substance was harvested and had unique healing properties that soothed the cyborgs of the day. But only a few small reservoirs remain in Minno's era, most owned by Cura Industries themselves, and the rest owned by protected merfolk populations that Cura sees as a nuisance. As natural Vitae depletes, the synthesized Vitae sold to ships in recent centuries is an immunosuppressant, a poison. It stops people's bodies from rejecting cuffs by breaking their ability to reject anything else. A simple cold can kill a cyborg with a compromised immune system. As soon as one starts feeling under the weather, it's time to stop taking Vitae, which gives infections a week or 2 or 3 to thrive. It's a tough balancing act for people like Minnow, always either too sick to fight infections or too weak to fight disease. While cuffs are marketed as a fairly universal system for conveniently swapping out limbs and are mostly manufactured by a few companies, the couplings themselves come in a disorienting variety of configurations, so finding a limb that fits the shape of your cuff can be difficult. And to top it all, non-titanium cuffs, which are the vast majority of them, oxidize after a few years inside the body. So if you don't change them for new ones, tetanus is the least of your problems. No matter how much Vitae you take, or how careful you are not to stress one, cuffs are a death sentence. So why go with them at all? We already have more advanced bionics today than Minnow does, whether they be fully integrated or held in place by a suction cup or straps. Well, it's the same reason some ships don't have full spectrum lights for their crops. Or soap. There's business in keeping these things artificially scarce, and in Kira's case, they need people to need vitae. They need infections to treat. So a while back, they partnered up with the biggest cuff manufacturers, creating a pipeline that forces cuffed people to take vitae regularly, by keeping them sick. And if any upstart competitor innovates a more comfortable alternative akin to today's bionics, Kira could just buy it from them and stop its development, or bribe a politician to declare it unsafe, while the suffering continues. They also fund anti-merfolk propaganda, sowing the seeds of bigotry towards the species, with the goal being to eventually legislate them out of their own territory, so Kira can bleed out the last natural vitae resource on the planet. So yeah, this company's bad news all around. Going back to Cyborgs, the youngest anyone can legally be cuffed is 5. That limit would be much higher if not for Kira's meddling, but Cyborgs this young are rare, as their growing bodies will need new implants every few months, just constantly recovering from surgeries, and few parents are going to put them through that. Minnow, a human born without any limbs, is a pretty extreme case, spending her first few years carried around like a backpack, receiving her first cuffs and arms when she was 4, her first legs a year later, and periodic new surgeries to avoid a potential quadruple displacement. She has been dependent on vitae for most of her life. When she came under the care of Andrea, captain of the Bellina, her adoptive mother provided a new set of limbs and cuffs that were lighter on the body, easier to use, and would even last longer. But even this setup wasn't ideal, and 7 years after losing Andrea, the only limb Minnow retains from this set is her right arm, the rest damaged or lost. Her new limbs were hand-me-downs that didn't match her frame or even her other limbs, creating a slump as she lurched along. Worse still, her cuffs from Andrea were now old, rusting, and too small for her body in her prime years. She was going to die of an accident or blood poisoning if things didn't look up for her soon, which they did. As much as entities like Kira and their affiliates have slowed the progress of bionics that don't completely destroy the body, your best bet for finding an alternative may ironically be in Parrot Country, like their flagship, though you could just as easily wind up with your meat suit even more compromised. Parrot soldiers often lose more than half or even 3/4 of their flesh, their bodies remade into hardy weapons that barely need to eat or sleep, some reduced to just a head, with entire interchangeable bodies from the neck down. At the same time, deeper within Parrot Country, for those looking to preserve their biomass, new technologies reminiscent of our day are in development. Suction-based limbs with barely any integration are the next step for Minnow's generation. In time, they could even create limbs that send signals to the brain to simulate sensory feedback, allowing one to feel their environment and interact with it more acutely, and perhaps given enough time, entire cloned body parts. But that's a ways off yet, and would someone like Minnow even want to go that far? After spending decades without real limbs, getting used to this lifestyle. Actual organic hands and feet that can be burned, cut, twisted, stabbed, crushed, all these new ways to be hurt, may be too big a change for some who'd simply prefer more comfortable prosthetics. As new land opens up in the years to come, the tide is turning against Kira, and these cyborg humans will eventually lead a more dignified, uncuffed life. With people like Minnow in the world, it may already be within reach. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Planet Ripple Logs, dark as it was. The next one will be a little lighter. You can purchase books from the series proper through Amazon or itch.io, read a draft of the first book for free online, watch videos like this early, and access more special content on Patreon, all linked in the description. See you soon with more of the Planet Ripple Logs.